Hello and welcome to Opinionated Marketers with Charles Nixon and me, Kiran Kapoor. Charles, you are a little bit exercised about the quality of journalistic interpretation of mathematics and graphs and statistics, I think.
Basically, there's a lot of discussion about fake news and fake videos and all that sort of stuff, and everyone needs to watch out for it on the basis of elections, etc. Well, I came across two items in quick succession, which made me realise that actually there's more to this than meets the eye, and from a marketer's perspective, accuracy is essential. And in two august publications, the Times and the Financial Times, either errors or misinterpretations led, in my opinion, to somewhat incorrect analysis. And I think that's important when we consider the fact that what we're trying to do is present a reliable picture of the external world to our bosses to make sure that they make the right decisions to drive a company forward. And it doesn't help when the Times can't add up. So the one that I've got right in front of me is a comparison, quite an interesting idea, of John Lewis's and Marks and Spencer's, and how one is doing better than the other, and how they are fairly comparable. And what I'm looking at here is the addition of John Lewis's sales, which are 4.9 billion, and Waitrose sales, which are 7.3. Now, however good your mental maths is, that does not add up to 10.9, which is what the claim is in the article, in order to basically make the statement that Marks and Spencer's and John Lewis's have roughly the same turnover. In fact, they don't. One is nearly 12 billion plus. The point that they were trying to make is that the total partnership sales are 10.9, but that obviously doesn't add up. And when a little error like that can get in the way, it damages credibility. It may well prove to be something somewhat erroneous. And from a marketer's perspective, internally as well as externally, it damages credibility. So what we need to make sure is that we are looking at accurate data, data which is these days, and people call it fact check, but at least logically checked to make sure that it's reasonable. And I'm no mathematician, but I basically tend to do broad maths to make sure that these figures are correct. And when you tend to see figures, especially these days, which are compared to daily basis, so X thousand number of people on the daily basis equals a bad situation, and you realize that actually you multiply by 365 and actually it's not such a large number after all, then I think that you need to take a sense check on these things. The other one was an article which I sent to Kiran, and which we were looking at, which was basically saying that the number of students coming from overseas was declining. The whole tenet of the article was based on the fact that, roughly speaking, either those universities which have had a greater than 10% decline and those which had a 10% decline had gone up, and was nearly a third. What it didn't discuss was the fact that 2/3 had shown an increase, and 1/3 in itself had shown a more than 10% increase. So the whole bias of the article seemed to be out of kilter to reality from the statistics. So again, I think it's important that marketers make their own decisions rather than being led by commentary from various sources, which may not necessarily be robust when you look at the statistics.
Yes, that one I found particularly worrying. We'll put the link with the podcast because although it's in the FT, it's not actually behind a firewall, whereas the other article was. And I mean, one expects the FT of all august publications to get its maths right. And I agree with you, reading through the article, the maths just doesn't seem to add up. Or rather, as you say, they decided to concentrate on a particular portion of the maths, there are lies, damn lies and statistics, to make a point, and just didn't cover off the other bit, which makes it quite a biased article. I don't think there's any other way of describing it.
No, I think this is an important aspect again, which is think about who wrote the article and why they wrote the article, and think about what the agenda might be behind it. We are getting into a very political situation now because of the general election in the UK and obviously the one in America, and you see a lot of other articles around the world about the general elections coming there. And I think what one might say is there would possibly be some sort of agenda in the way in which some of these articles are interpreted. And that may or may not be what your company's agenda is. And therefore, I think it's important that you take a step back and consider whether or not this is a sensible reflection of the data from your perspective. So, it's always been a case from a historian's perspective, which is what I am, is, understand who wrote and why they wrote. I mean, there's always the famous phrase that history is always written by the victors. Well, that's only the case, of course, if they can write. So you have to be, concerned about what it is that is said. And then, of course, you have to think about the counter swing of the pendulum several decades afterwards.
Yes, revisionist history is always quite interesting. We're seeing a lot of that. We see a lot of that continually, but it is important. But yes, to come back to your point about marketing, we use a lot of these sources to back up things like our macroeconomic environment analysis. So when we're doing a situation analysis, we're looking for big trends and changes. You go to newspapers, particularly places like the FT, assuming they are good sources. And sometimes you do just have to take a step back and go, well, have they selectively chosen what they're going to quote in order to back an argument that may be a reasonable argument, but it may still be a selective proportion of data.
Yes.
Charles, were there any others that you came across? So, I think those two came back to back, which is partly why you were so concerned.
I think the only other one was the Statistics Office did criticise the Prime Minister or the Cabinet Office over its use of statistics during last week, which again, shows the fact that if you're not careful, they do tend to get used for partisan reasons. So the Office of National Statistics not only is a highly credible organisation, but also makes a great deal of play about defending the accuracy of its interpretation and other people's interpretations. So I think that's very important. And the other aspect I suppose I would mention is that if any research is conducted, then do look at the sample size and make sure, obviously, if you're conducting your own research, that it follows the MRS guidelines.
The MRS being the Market Research Society, who have very strict and very clear guidelines on what one should do.
Yes, indeed. Very much so.
Charles, as ever, lovely to speak to you. I think it was a really good points today about checking one's statistical sources and the way that statistics are being interpreted. Lovely to speak.
Nice to talk to you again. Bye-bye.